It's not easy to trust what you don't understand, and in a time when the partisan divide is growing even stronger in our country, we should not shy away from teaching students how to be critical consumers of news. Before I explain what news literacy is, I'm first going to explain disciplinary literacy. Disciplinary literacy is teaching students how to read, write, and think within the context of a particular subject or discipline. So we have disciplinary literacy, and under the umbrella of disciplinary literacy is news literacy, or teaching students how to read, write, and think within the context of news media consumption. So then underneath the umbrella of news literacy also falls aspects of all of the following: information literacy, digital/social media literacy, and civil discourse. Information literacy is teaching students how to identify and challenge the credibility and bias of various sources. So when students look at a source, they will think twice about where the author is coming from instead of taking it at face value. Next is digital/social media literacy, which is about being able to effectively consume and create credible online information within the context of social media algorithms and data collection. For example, someone who is social media literate would understand how the algorithm of a site like Facebook can create news bubbles that could influence the different types of information they will and won't see. The last facet of news literacy is civil discourse. And civil discourse is quite simple, frankly. It's the art of being able to have a conversation with someone you disagree with. The first question I want to address is, why is the news even important? Because if it isn't important, we should be focusing our resources on other topics. One 2017 combined study from Indiana University and the University of Illinois found that there was a positive correlation between news literacy and political efficacy, or trust of the government. To me, it makes sense. If you don't know how to read or understand the news, you aren't likely to trust it or the government they're talking about. And in general, Americans do not trust the media. According to a 2020 Pew Research Center study about the 2020 election, about 1/5 of both Democratic and Republican voters only consume news sources that reflect their own personal views, rejecting all other news sources as untrustworthy or uncredible. So, not only is the news important and Americans in general don't trust it, but it's a surprise to no one to hear that the news has drastically changed over the past 10 years. According to a 2018 Pew Research Center survey, social media has surpassed traditional print newspapers as a news source. While television is the predominant news source for Americans over age 50, online news websites, radio, and social media are the predominant news sources for Americans under 50. The number one news source for Americans under age 30 is social media, followed closely by online news sites. The next question I want to answer is, why middle schoolers? It is important to start news and digital literacy education young, especially at the middle school age, because according to a 2016 survey by Common Sense Media, the average age a child procures a social media account is 12 and a half. So not only has the way Americans consume news drastically changed, but children are being inundated by a wealth of information, credible and non-credible, at a very young age. Now that we've addressed what news literacy is and why it's important for middle schoolers especially, let's take a look at what research is known about it. Within what we do know, let's first look at research on information literacy. A 2019 study from Towson University on news consumption habits of college students found that critical consumers of news are those that are intentionally seeking news out, opposed to happening upon a news source. Another information literacy-focused study from the University of Pittsburgh found that middle school students researching historical sources on the internet were more likely to fully understand something if they looked at more than one source. If looking at more than one source helps students understand what they're reading, is that what they're doing? The short answer is no. Conan 2017 found there was a discrepancy between necessary news literacy skills, the skills being explicitly taught in secondary education, and the skills that the students were actually using. The study confirmed what their literature review found, and that is that students use strategies they find the most efficient to find easily accessible sources over more academically vetted ones. The most interesting claim in this study was the reason why students lean towards these heuristics or mental shortcuts are that they work. They work well enough to get them their desired result. They use these mental shortcuts as a cognitive crutch to get them from point A to point B, and eventually those mental shortcuts turn into habits. Now to talk some about what is known about digital/social media literacy research. A digital literacy case study from Cyprus University of Technology sought to find to what degree adults are social media literate. The study found that perceived competence often did not match up to participants' actual abilities to determine credibility. In conclusion about what is known, most of my findings were that news literacy education as it currently stands is either non-existent or ineffective in obtaining its desired result of forming students into being critical, well-rounded consumers of news. Most of the research that I found concluded there are huge news literacy skill gaps in college-age students. However, I do want to note that these studies reflect the news literacy skills of only those with previously formed habits, not those with habits still being formed, like middle schoolers. I think what speaks louder than what is known about news literacy research and practice is what is unknown about news literacy research and practice. So without further delay, let's move into the unknown. As we discussed in the known section, the general population of news-consuming adults have several gaps in their information and literacy skill sets. However, the skills that are not often or ever being tested and researched are social media literacy and civil discourse skills. We talked about social media literacy some in the known section, but I do want to note that that study was from the Republic of Cyprus, which is a completely different demographic and culture than the social media using American middle schooler. More research could certainly be done in the way of social media literacy. So that's essentially 2/3 of the umbrella of news literacy that's not being researched right now. That's a huge amount of ground that could still be covered. About middle schoolers specifically, while I found literature investigating upper secondary news literacy education practices, there are no found research studies specifically about news literacy education practices, effective or otherwise, at the middle school level. Now, I don't want to leave you completely without hope. While there's still much to do in the way of news literacy research, especially at the middle school level, in the meantime, news literacy educational resources do exist. The Not So Fast campaign creates educational content that is easily shareable on social media that hopes to inspire people to become independent thinkers when consuming and creating social media. The Journalism Education Association provides journalism education standards, as well as, with a paid membership, access to nearly 200 weeks' worth of lesson plans centered around those standards. The Poynter Institute is an organization that works more with developing credibility standards and training resources within the field of journalism. However, one really cool offshoot of the Poynter Institute is the Politifact website. Politifact is a fact-checking website that rates news stories on a scale from true to pants on fire false. This could be an awesome resource for having conversations about the scale of credibility. That is, that a news story can have some things in it that are true and some things that are false. It's not always black and white. This is completely true and completely false. Open Secrets is another great fact-checking website. They follow the campaign contributions to all of the executive and legislative politicians in America from the local level up. This is a great website for having conversations about how money may influence a politician. There are also resources like this kid-friendly, robot-hosted game show podcast where a kid competes against two adults to try to figure out what news stories are the truth and which ones are a lie. And lastly, the Center for Media Literacy provides professional development opportunities in media literacy for pre-service teachers and in-service teachers. I want to encourage anyone interested to follow any or all of these organizations and sites that I talked about on social media to stay up to date on any education resources that they provide.